Welcome back to Conversation to Close. This is Sean. I got a question from a new person in my community today, and it's a good question. I get it a lot from new people, so I thought I'd do a quick video on it. And the question basically was, how do I recognize when I'm talking to a seller if I've got a good subject to on my hands? That's a great question. So I'm going to give everybody a couple of things to be on the lookout for. I'm also going to give you guys a couple of things to be on the lookout for, but in the other direction. But before we get into that, another thing that I get from new wholesalers pitching subject to is they keep saying assuming. I get all these recorded calls. Sean, listen to my call. Tell me how I did. And they say the same thing. The buyer's assuming the mortgage. The buyer's assuming the mortgage. No, they are not. Stop saying that. What's happening is when the transaction is done, the mortgage is still going to be in the seller's name. It's still going to be under the seller's social security number. All we're doing is setting up servicing for the mortgage payment. And that's just a fancy way of saying we're going to make sure the payment is paid on your behalf. And here's how that works, because a lot of people don't know this. So let's say we've got a deal. You got the subject to deal under contract. You found your buyer. What's going to happen is once you turn that into title and escrow and it gets towards the end of closing, the escrow officer is going to call the buyer and they're going to say, I need your routing number and I need your account number for whatever account you're going to use to pay this mortgage. Then they're going to call the seller. They're going to say, I need your login information and your password for your mortgage account. And the escrow officer is going to attach the buyer's bank account information to the seller's mortgage account and set up that automatic payment. And the reason why we use a third party escrow is because, let's say, for example, 1 month they go to draft the payment from the buyer and it gets declined, insufficient funds, whatever. Escrow is going to be notified immediately so that they can then notify the seller. And the reason why that's put in place is so the seller and the escrow officer are going to reach out to the buyer and say, hey, what's going on? We didn't get our payment. If for whatever reason the buyer can't be reached, the seller knows that, hey, I need to make a payment on this mortgage. I don't want anything to go on my credit. And that's literally how you can explain it to the seller when you're pitching subject to. That's how it works. That process is set up. That's why it's a third party escrow company that handles that. They're smack dab in the middle. So stop saying assuming. We are servicing the mortgage payment. And by we, I mean the buyer. We're just facilitating that as the wholesaler being in the middle. So, what are a couple of things to be on the listen for when you're on the phone with the seller and you want to identify if you've got a potential subject to deal? First and foremost, foreclosure and pre foreclosure. It's so unfortunate for the seller that they have to go through that. But fortunately for you, that's a good segue into a subject to deal. Here's what you need to be on the lookout for. If you've been following some of the stuff that I've been teaching, you know that when you're doing a creative deal, your entry fee, you want to be below 10%. So you got to keep an eye out for the arrears. And that's not even including if the seller is expecting some money upon closing. So all of that has to be factored in. And that's factored into the entry fee. There are some things that kind of offset that. That doesn't mean that it's, if it doesn't fit 10% on a pre foreclosure, it's automatically a dead deal. Not by any means. You can find a homestead buyer. It depends on the rehab. It depends on the interest rate. It depends on the balance after the arrears. There are a lot of factors. Just be on the lookout for that. What's another one? Low to no equity. There are a myriad of reasons of why someone could have low to no equity in their home. Whatever the case is, here's how that works. When someone goes to sell their home on market with a realtor, traditionally, whatever their portion of the closing costs are, whatever that bill is, gets pulled from the proceeds of the money that they're going to receive from selling their home. When they have low to no equity, that means that they don't have that to cover it. So they have to come to the closing table with that money. And sometimes that's three, four, $5,000, depending on how much you sold the house for. So that's a good segue into subject to, because then you can explain to the seller, hey, Mr. Seller, if you sell your house traditionally, I'm looking at your mortgage, I'm, looking at all the information you gave me. It's going to cost you money to sell this house. Well, what if I can put money in your pocket and then we just service the mortgage for you? And that's how you start the conversation in subject to. Here's another one: motivated sellers. If someone is super hot, ready to sell their house like yesterday, and it's not because of a pre foreclosure or anything like that, again, could be a bunch of things. Maybe they bought a house, they just got a promotion, but it's on the other side of the country. They got to move ASAP. They don't have time to list it. They still have a mortgage. They can't hire a realtor. Again, they don't have the time. They got to go. Subject to would be fantastic. And you can posture it as, hey, I'm going to help fund your move. Good luck. We'll take care of the mortgage from here. Another one: if you hear someone mention that their mortgage is underwater, what does that mean? That means that their house is not worth as much as their mortgage is. A lot of times they just want to get from underneath it. You pitch subject to. So again, a lot of different reasons. Those are just the top, but a lot of different reasons that someone would really lean more towards the subject to. They just may not know what it is. Now on to the ones that you need to be on the lookout for. These are the ones that are not that awesome. If you're dealing with someone that has a VA loan, be careful. And it's not because of anything with you, it's because you're looking out for your client, you're looking out for them. A lot of people who are getting into subject to don't realize that if you're going to subject to a VA loan, whatever VA benefits that veteran has to own that home, again, the mortgage is still going to stay under that name, that social security number, and that VA loan. That means whatever the balance of that is going to be deducted from their total benefits. So you need to make sure you have a responsibility to make sure that they know that and they have a plan for it. Because if they don't realize what subject to is, they're not professionals like you're supposed to be. So if they don't understand that, the last thing you want is to be on your high horse after you close that subject to deal. You get a phone call 2 days later. Now this veteran who served our country can't go get another house because their VA benefits are tied up in the house you just did a subject to for. And nobody told them. You don't want to be in that situation. So keep that in mind. Ask what kind of loan it is. Or if you're doing your discovery, you pick up that there are in or were in the military, ask, hey, this mortgage, is it a VA mortgage? It's a very simple question. And then if they say yes, you explain to them what I just said and make sure they understand. And again, not a deal killer. You don't know what the situation is. Maybe they're going to be moving in with someone else. Maybe they're going to rent. Maybe they're buying something and they've already got living quarters in it. Whatever the situation is, they may not even be using. Maybe they're going to go buy a plot of land and do a tiny house. Whatever the situation is, make sure that everyone's on the same page about that fact. That's your responsibility. And the last one that I want to go over: divorce. If I'm talking to someone and I find out that they're selling the home because of a divorce, chances are that divorce decree is not going to allow a subject to or even a seller finance. Because what that divorce decree is saying is that the asset, meaning the house, or if it has a mortgage, that promissory note to the bank needs to be paid up and dissolved between the two people that are getting a divorce. So you can't necessarily leave that mortgage open on a divorce. And it's the same thing with a seller finance. That house, even if it doesn't have a mortgage, that asset is still in both of their names. And as per the divorce decree by a judge, that asset needs to be sold off and the proceeds split. So if I hear someone say subject to, I'll bring up the divorce decree, make sure that I got it right. And if it is, I don't even bring up subject to or creative financing. I know at that point it probably needs to be a cash deal or an ovation. I hope that answered your question. If you have any more questions, by all means, drop them below. This is Sean with Conversation to Close. Have a great night.